The year was 2247, when the first alien ships appeared in Earth's sky. They came from a distant empire called the Velthari Dominion. And they looked at humanity the way a grown man looks at a child learning to walk. They were amused. They were not impressed. Admiral Daniel Mercer was 63 years old when he stood before the United Earth Council that day. He had spent his entire life preparing for war. But what he proposed was something far more difficult than fighting. He proposed that humanity should pretend to be weak. The council chamber was silent as he spoke. Every leader from every nation sat before him, waiting to hear his plan. "We cannot win a war against them," Mercer said. His voice was calm and steady. "Not today. Not in 10 years. Maybe not in 100 years. They have ships that can cross the galaxy in weeks. They have weapons that can turn continents into dust. And they are not alone. There are dozens of empires out there. And they have been fighting and conquering for thousands of years." Councilwoman Patricia Lang raised her hand. She was the representative from the European Federation, and she was known for asking difficult questions. "Then what do you suggest, Admiral? That we surrender before the war even begins?" Mercer shook his head slowly. "No. I suggest something much harder than surrender. I suggest we lie." He pressed a button on his console, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the room. It showed the alien ships in orbit, their sleek designs making human vessels look like toys. "They expect us to be afraid," Mercer continued. "They expect us to show them everything we have and beg for protection. Every new species does this. They reveal their technology, their weapons, their resources, hoping to impress the greater powers. And then those greater powers know exactly how to defeat them." He paused and looked at each council member in turn. "We will do the opposite. We will show them outdated ships and primitive weapons. We will let them believe our fastest vessels can barely reach the nearest star. We will accept their insults and their unfair treaties and their casual cruelty. And while they laugh at us, while they dismiss us as harmless newcomers, we will build in secret. We will learn everything they know. We will develop technology they cannot imagine. And when the time comes, when they finally push us too far, we will show them what humanity can truly do." The debate lasted for 3 days. Some leaders argued that hiding their strength was cowardly. Others worried that the deception would fail, but in the end, the council voted unanimously in favor of Mercer's plan. Humanity would wear a mask of weakness, and they would wear it for as long as necessary. The Velthari delegation arrived on Earth 2 weeks later. They were tall beings, with silver skin and eyes that reflected light, like mirrors. Their leader, a diplomat named Sorthax, looked around the council chamber with barely hidden contempt. "Your species is young," Sorthax said through a translation device. "You have achieved basic space travel, which is admirable. But you must understand your place in the galactic order. There are empires that have existed for 10,000 years. Your entire civilization is nothing more than a brief moment in their history." Ambassador Henry Walsh nodded politely. He was a small man, with gray hair and a gentle face. The Velthari had no idea that he had memorized the location of every weapon in the room, or that beneath his suit was a layer of armor that could stop their plasma rifles. "We understand," Walsh said humbly. "We are grateful that the Dominion has chosen to notice us at all. We hope only for peace and the opportunity to learn from our elders." Sorthax smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "Good. Then you will accept our terms. Your species will be granted limited trading rights within Dominion space. You will not expand beyond your current borders without permission, and you will pay a tribute of resources to the Dominion each year as thanks for our protection." The terms were insulting. They treated humanity like a servant species. But Walsh simply bowed his head. "We accept." Over the following decades, humanity played its role perfectly. Human ships traveled through the galaxy slowly, taking months to reach destinations that Velthari vessels reached in days. Human weapons failed spectacularly in the few minor conflicts that arose, convincing everyone that Earth's military was no threat to anyone. The Kethrani Empire was particularly cruel to human settlements. They were a warrior species with scales like dark iron and teeth designed for tearing flesh. They raided human colonies for sport, taking prisoners and resources whenever they pleased. Captain Ryan Cole commanded a patrol ship called the Steady Dawn. His official mission was to protect human trade routes, but his actual orders were clear. Do not fight back. Do not reveal true capabilities. Retreat if threatened. Every time Kethrani raiders appeared, Cole had to watch them loot human cargo ships while his crew stood helplessly. Every time, he gave the same order. Stand down, do not engage. His first officer, Lieutenant Commander Amanda Hayes, would stand beside him with her hands clenched into fists. She was a tall woman with dark hair and eyes that burned with barely contained fury. How much longer? She would ask after each humiliation. Cole never had an answer. The orders came from Earth, from people who saw a bigger picture. He had to trust that they knew what they were doing. In secret shipyards hidden in asteroid fields and abandoned moons, humanity built its true fleet. Scientists worked day and night developing weapons and shields and engines that made alien technology look primitive. The greatest minds in human history dedicated their lives to a single goal: making sure that when the mask finally came off, no power in the galaxy could stand against Earth. 300 years passed. Generations were born and died without ever knowing the truth about their own species. The lie was passed from one leader to the next, a sacred trust that bound humanity together in patient silence. And then, in the spring of 2547, the Kethrani Empire made a mistake that would change the galaxy forever. They attacked New Geneva, and humanity decided that 300 years of pretending was finally enough. New Geneva was a beautiful world. It had blue oceans and green forests and cities that sparkled under twin suns. 4 million people called it home. They had built schools and hospitals and parks where children played without fear. They believed they were safe. They were wrong. The Kethrani fleet arrived on a spring morning when the colony was celebrating Foundation Day. 200 years ago, the first settlers had landed on this world and carved a home out of wilderness. Now their descendants gathered in the streets to celebrate, never knowing that death was falling from the sky. Governor Nathan Pierce was giving a speech in the Capitol Square when his aide ran up to him with a pale face and trembling hands. "Sir, we have contacts in orbit. Kethrani warships. At least 40 of them." Pierce felt his heart freeze in his chest. He turned to the crowd of smiling families and happy children, and he knew that everything was about to change. "Get everyone to the shelters," he said quietly. Now, High Lord Vectis commanded the Kethrani fleet from his flagship, the Crimson Fang. He was an old warrior with scars covering his scaled face and a hatred for humanity that burned like fire. For years, he had watched humans accept every insult and injury without fighting back. He despised them for their weakness. "Open a channel to the colony," Vectis ordered. His communication officer obeyed, and moments later, Vectis was looking at the face of Governor Pierce. The human looked afraid, which pleased Vectis greatly. "Human Governor, I am High Lord Vectis of the Kethrani Empire. This planet sits on ancestral Kethrani territory. Your presence here is illegal. You have 1 hour to evacuate your entire population. Any humans remaining after that time will be considered enemy combatants and destroyed." Pierce stared at him in disbelief. 1 hour? There are 4 million people here. We cannot possibly evacuate in 1 hour. We need days, weeks to arrange transport. Vectis smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Then I suggest you hurry." The channel closed. Pierce immediately contacted Earth, sending an emergency transmission that crossed light years in seconds. He begged for help, for ships, for anything that could save his people. The response came quickly, but it was not what he hoped. "Hold on, Governor. Help is coming. You must buy as much time as you can." But there was no time to buy. The hour passed like water through open fingers. Pierce watched families running through the streets, trying to reach ships that did not exist. He watched parents carrying children toward shelters that could not protect them from orbital bombardment. When the countdown reached 0, Vectis gave the order: "Burn them all." The Kethrani ships opened fire with plasma cannons that turned the sky red. Buildings exploded into flame. Streets became rivers of molten rock. The screams of 4 million souls rose toward the heavens, but no one was listening. Governor Pierce stood on the roof of the government building as fire consumed everything around him. He held a communicator in his hand, recording his final message. "Tell Earth. Tell them we did not run. Tell them to make them pay." The building collapsed beneath him, and Nathan Pierce became one more name on a list of 4 million dead. The footage reached Earth within hours. President Victoria Adams watched it in the Situation Room beneath Geneva. Surrounded by her highest military and intelligence advisors, the images showed cities turned to glass craters. They showed bodies floating in radioactive dust. They showed children's toys melted into the ground. Adams did not cry. She did not scream. She simply watched with eyes that had turned cold as winter ice. When the footage ended, she looked at General Christopher Kane. He was a large man with gray hair and the steady hands of a surgeon. He had spent his entire career preparing for this moment. "How long until the Shadow Fleet is ready?" Adams asked. Kane did not hesitate. "The fleet is fully operational, Madam President. 1,200 capital ships, 40,000 support vessels. Every weapon system is charged and standing by. We have been ready for decades." Adams nodded slowly. "And our allies? The species who have been working with us in secret? The Velthari Resistance has pledged 300 ships. The Free Colonies of Thex will contribute 200 more. The Sindari Republic is mobilizing their entire fleet as we speak. They have waited for this day, as long as we have." Around the table, military leaders who had spent their lives hiding sat up straighter. Scientists who had developed weapons no one was allowed to use felt their hearts begin to race. The moment they had dreamed of was finally here. "What about the Galactic Assembly?" asked Secretary of State Linda Morrison. She was a sharp woman who had spent years smiling at aliens who treated her like a child. "The Kethrani will claim they were enforcing territorial rights. They will twist the truth and make us look like the aggressors." Adams stood and walked to the window. Somewhere above the clouds, hidden in folds of space that human scientists had learned to manipulate generations ago, the true fleet waited. Ships so powerful they could crack moons in half. Weapons so devastating they had been sealed away for 3 centuries. Waiting for the day when peace was no longer possible. "Contact Ambassador Scott Brennan at the Galactic Assembly," Adams said. Her voice was calm, but there was something dangerous beneath the surface. "Tell him to request an emergency session. Every species, every delegate, full attendance." Morrison frowned. "What should I tell him to say?" Adams turned to face her cabinet. For 300 years, humanity had bowed and scraped and accepted every cruelty the galaxy offered. They had let their children be killed, and their colonies be raided, and their dignity be stripped away, all for the sake of a plan that required patience beyond measure. That patience had run out. "Tell him to say that humanity has a message for the galaxy," Adams said. "Tell him to say that we were holding back, and now we are done." She looked at General Kane. "Begin mobilization, full war footing. I want every ship, every soldier, every weapon, ready to move within 24 hours. Kane saluted and left the room to set the galaxy on fire. Above Earth, hidden in the dark spaces between stars, 1,200 warships powered up their engines for the first time in decades. 40,000 support vessels loaded weapons that could tear through alien armor like paper. And millions of soldiers who had trained in secret for their entire lives finally received the orders they had always wanted. The hunt was about to begin. The Galactic Assembly was the largest structure ever built by intelligent beings. It floated in neutral space between the great empires, a massive station where representatives from hundreds of species gathered to argue and negotiate, and sometimes prevent wars. For 3 centuries, humanity had occupied a small corner of the assembly, ignored by the powerful and pitied by the weak. Today would be different. Ambassador Scott Brennan walked through the corridors of the station with a calm that surprised even himself. He was a tall man with brown hair turning gray at the temples and eyes that had seen too much cruelty to be surprised by anything. He had spent 20 years in this place, smiling at insults and swallowing his pride. Every day had been a performance. Every handshake had been a lie. He was tired of lying. The main chamber was already full when he arrived. Thousands of delegates from hundreds of species filled the circular room, their bodies ranging from humanoid to something that looked like floating crystals. The Kathrani delegation sat near the front, their scaled faces showing satisfaction at the news from New Geneva. They expected humanity to come begging for mercy. High Ambassador Korath of the Kathrani Empire leaned back in his seat and watched Brennan approach the central podium. He had met this human many times over the years, always finding him weak and eager to please. Today, something was different. The human walked differently. His shoulders were straight instead of hunched. His eyes met Korath's without looking away. Brennan reached the podium and stood in silence for a moment, looking out at the assembled delegates. The chamber gradually fell quiet as species after species noticed the change in the human ambassador. 312 years ago, Brennan began, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. Humanity received its first contact from the stars. The Velthari Dominion arrived at our world and looked at us like we were children playing with sticks. They offered us a place at the bottom of the galactic order, and we accepted. The Velthari delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. We accepted because we looked at this galaxy and saw what happens to newcomers who appear strong. We saw species wiped out before they could become threats. We saw civilizations crushed because they dared to develop technology that worried the established powers. We saw a galaxy ruled by fear and violence, where the strong devoured the weak and called it natural order. Korath stood up, his scales rippling with anger. What is this nonsense? You come here to lecture us after we rightfully reclaimed our territory? You should be on your knees begging forgiveness for illegally settling on Kathrani land. Brennan looked at him with an expression that made the old warrior feel suddenly uncertain. New Geneva was not your land. Those 4 million people were not illegal settlers. They were innocent civilians, murdered by a regime that has grown fat on cruelty and confident in its immunity from justice. Korath laughed, though it sounded forced. And what will you do about it, human? Send your pathetic fleet against the Kathrani Empire? We would destroy you in days. Perhaps, Brennan said calmly. Perhaps you would have, if we had shown you our real fleet. He pressed a button on the podium. Every display screen in the chamber flickered to life. They showed live footage from space, transmitted from cameras positioned throughout the galaxy. At first, the screens showed nothing but empty void. Then the void began to change. Ships appeared. Not the slow, clumsy vessels humanity had shown the galaxy for 3 centuries. These were something else entirely. They were sleek and massive, their hulls gleaming with technology that made the assembly's scientists gasp in disbelief. They emerged from folds in space that should not have existed, materializing like ghosts becoming solid. Hundreds of them, then thousands. The Kathrani delegates stared at the screens with growing horror. Each human ship was larger than their biggest dreadnought. Each one radiated power readings that their instruments could barely measure. This is the first fleet, Brennan said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. One of 12. We have been building them in secret for 300 years. We have been developing technology you cannot understand. We have been training soldiers you have never seen. He paused and let the numbers sink in. 12 fleets. 14,400 capital ships. Over 400,000 support vessels. Weapons that your scientists told you were impossible. Shields that your engineers said could never exist. The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates screamed questions at each other. Military advisors tried desperately to contact their home worlds. The Velthari ambassador buried his face in his hands, finally understanding the scope of his species' mistake. Brennan waited for the noise to die down before continuing. For 3 centuries, you believed humanity was weak. You raided our colonies and killed our people and laughed at our protests. You thought we were harmless. You thought we were afraid. His voice hardened. We were not afraid. We were patient. We were building. And now that you have finally pushed us beyond what we were willing to accept, we are going to show you what patience can create. Korath had gone pale beneath his scales. He looked at the screens showing human ships that dwarfed anything his empire had ever produced. He looked at Brennan's cold eyes, and he finally understood that everything he thought he knew about humanity was wrong. "You cannot threaten the Galactic Assembly," Korath said, but his voice shook. "This is neutral territory. If you attack us here, every species will unite against you." Brennan shook his head slowly. "We are not here to threaten the Assembly. We are here to deliver a warning. Humanity has been wronged. New Geneva was a crime against our species, and we will have justice." He looked directly at the Kethrani delegation. "You have 48 hours to surrender High Lord Vectis and his entire command staff for trial. You have 48 hours to withdraw all Kethrani forces from human space. You have 48 hours to agree to pay reparations for every human life your empire has taken." Korath sputtered with outrage. "You cannot demand such things. The Kethrani Empire does not surrender to anyone." Brennan smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who had finally stopped pretending to be prey. "Then in 48 hours, you will learn why you should have." He turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving behind a galaxy that would never see humanity the same way again. The countdown had begun. The Kethrani Empire did not surrender. High Lord Vectis called the human ultimatum an insult to his species, and ordered his fleets to prepare for war. He gathered 400 warships above the ruins of New Geneva, daring humanity to come and take back their dead world. He was about to learn the true cost of his arrogance. Admiral Daniel Mercer III stood on the bridge of the USS Horizon, flagship of the First Fleet. He was the grandson of the man who had first proposed humanity's great deception, and he had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. Around him, officers moved with quiet efficiency, checking systems that had been tested 1,000 times. "How long until we reach New Geneva?" Mercer asked. His navigation officer looked up from her console. "At current speed, Admiral, we will arrive in 4 minutes. 4 minutes." A journey that would have taken the old human ships months was now measured in heartbeats. Captain Lauren Mitchell stood at Mercer's side, her eyes fixed on the view screen. She was a woman with sharp features and dark hair pulled back in a tight braid. Her parents had died on New Geneva. Her younger brother had been visiting them for Foundation Day. She had watched the footage of their deaths 17 times before she stopped counting. "Admiral," the communications officer reported, "the Kethrani are hailing us. High Lord Vectis is demanding to speak with you." Mercer nodded. "Put him on screen." The display flickered, and Vectis appeared. He was sitting on a throne made of bones, a tradition among Kethrani commanders who wanted to show their kills. His scales were dark as midnight, and his eyes glowed with contempt. "Human Admiral," Vectis said, "you have made a grave mistake coming here. I have 400 warships ready to tear your fleet apart. I have 30,000 warriors eager to bathe in human blood. Turn back now, and I may allow some of your species to survive as slaves." Mercer studied the alien warlord with something that might have been pity. "High Lord, I am going to give you one chance. Surrender unconditionally. Release all human prisoners. Submit yourself and your command staff to trial for war crimes. If you do these things, your warriors will be allowed to return home safely." Vectis laughed, a harsh sound like grinding metal. "You think you can threaten me? I have crushed species far older and more powerful than humanity. Your hidden fleet does not frighten me. Ships are only metal and fire. It is the warriors inside that win battles, and Kethrani warriors have never been defeated. You have 60 seconds to accept my terms," Mercer said calmly. The laughter died on Vectis's face. He had expected the human to negotiate, to show fear, to try to find some diplomatic solution. Instead, this admiral was giving him ultimatums as if their positions were reversed. 50 seconds, Mercer continued. Vectis leaned forward, his claws digging into the arms of his throne. "You are bluffing. You must be bluffing. No species hides this kind of power for 300 years. 40 seconds. The Kethrani commander looked off-screen at his tactical officers. They were shaking their heads, unable to explain the readings they were getting from the human fleet. The power signatures were impossible. The weapon systems were unknown. Nothing made sense. 30 seconds. Vectis made his decision. He had built his entire career on never backing down. He had conquered worlds and slaughtered billions. He would not surrender to creatures he had always despised as weaklings. "All ships," he roared. "Battle positions. Prepare to destroy these arrogant humans." 20 seconds, Mercer said. "Fire everything," Vectis screamed. "Kill them all." 400 Kathrani warships opened fire at once. Plasma cannons that could melt mountains unleashed rivers of energy. Missiles carrying warheads that could crack continents streaked through space. Beam weapons that had burned through the shields of 100 species carved bright lines across the darkness. The human fleet did not raise shields. They did not return fire. They simply flew forward into the storm of destruction. Captain Mitchell watched the Kathrani weapons splash against the horizon's hull like rain against stone. Not a single alarm sounded. Not a single damage report came in. The most devastating weapons the Kathrani Empire possessed were doing nothing more than creating a pleasant glow across human armor. "Sir," the tactical officer reported, his voice trembling with barely contained excitement. "Enemy weapons are having zero effect. Our hull integrity is at 100% across all ships. Enemy weapons. I would not. Enemy weapons. Enemy weapons." Mercer nodded. He watched the timer reach 0. "All ships," he said quietly. "Weapons free." The human fleet opened fire. It was not a battle. It was an execution. Human weapons cut through Kathrani shields like they did not exist. Ships that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries exploded in cascades of fire and debris. Warriors who had never known defeat screamed as their vessels came apart around them. Vectis watched in horror as his fleet was torn to pieces. He ordered retreat, but human ships moved faster than his vessels could run. He called for reinforcements. But the communications officer reported that every Kathrani fleet in the sector was under attack simultaneously. Humanity was not just defeating them at New Geneva. They were dismantling the entire empire in a single coordinated strike. "How?" Vectis whispered. "How is this possible?" The Crimson Fang shuddered as human weapons found their mark. Consoles exploded. Officers died at their stations. The throne of bones cracked and shattered beneath Vectis's feet. Captain Mitchell watched the enemy flagship begin to break apart on her screen. "Admiral, the Crimson Fang's shields have failed. We can destroy them now." Mercer shook his head. "No. Target their engines and weapons only. I want Vectis taken alive. He will stand trial for New Geneva." Mitchell clenched her jaw but nodded. She wanted revenge, but she understood that justice was more important. The battle lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds. When it was over, 312 Kathrani warships had been destroyed. 88 more had surrendered after seeing what human weapons could do. High Lord Vectis was found in the wreckage of his flagship, still alive, still defiant, still unable to understand how everything had gone so wrong. Admiral Mercer watched the Kathrani survivors being brought aboard human vessels. Around him, officers were already coordinating the next phase of the campaign. 12 more fleets were striking Kathrani targets across the galaxy. By the time the day was over, the empire that had murdered 4 million people on New Geneva would cease to exist as a military power. Mitchell stepped up beside him. "It really is over, isn't it?" Mercer looked at the ruins of New Geneva floating in the darkness, a tomb for 4 million souls who had died because humanity had pretended to be weak for 300 years. "No," he said softly. "This is just the beginning." 6 months had passed since the Battle of New Geneva, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Kathrani Empire had fallen completely. Their worlds were occupied by human peacekeeping forces. Their military had been disbanded. Their leaders faced trial for centuries of crimes against dozens of species. High Lord Vectis sat in a cell on a frozen moon orbiting a dead star, waiting for a tribunal that would decide his fate. But humanity had not stopped there. In the weeks following the revelation of the Shadow Fleet, every species that had ever wronged humanity received a visit from human warships. Some surrendered immediately, offering apologies and reparations without being asked. Others tried to fight and discovered that the Kathrani were not unique in their vulnerability to human weapons. The Velthari Dominion, the first species to contact Earth all those centuries ago, sent a delegation to Geneva with gifts and promises of eternal friendship. President Victoria Adams received them politely, but made no agreements. She remembered every insult, every unfair treaty, every time human ambassadors had been forced to bow before Velthari arrogance. "We will consider your proposals," she told the Velthari delegation. "But first, you must answer for 300 years of exploitation." The message was clear. Humanity would not forget. Humanity would not pretend anymore. And humanity would hold every species accountable for how they had treated the newcomers they had dismissed as weak. The Galactic Assembly met in emergency session after emergency session, trying to understand the new reality. Species that had ignored humanity for centuries now competed for human attention. Trade agreements that had favored alien empires for generations were renegotiated on human terms. Technology that humanity had hidden for 300 years began to transform the galaxy. Ambassador Scott Brennan became the most important diplomat in known space. He received thousands of requests for meetings, for alliances, for protection. He granted some and denied others based on how each species had treated humanity during the long pretense. "You are playing favorites," the Thex representative complained during one session. "This is not fair." Brennan smiled pleasantly. "Was it fair when your ships raided our cargo convoys for decades? Was it fair when your courts ruled against human merchants in every dispute? Was it fair when you sold weapons to the Kethrani, knowing they would be used against our colonies?" The representative had no answer. President Adams addressed the full Galactic Assembly 6 months after the war began. She stood at the same podium where Brennan had delivered humanity's warning, looking out at thousands of delegates, who now watched her with respect instead of contempt. "For 3 centuries," she said, "humanity played weak because we understood something fundamental about this galaxy. Power invites fear. Fear invites destruction. We chose to build in secret, to prepare for the day when strength would be necessary, rather than reveal ourselves and be destroyed before we could protect our people." She paused and let her gaze sweep across the chamber. That day came when the Kethrani massacred 4 million innocent souls on New Geneva. "We responded with force because force was the only language your galaxy understood. We dismantled an empire in weeks because they left us no choice." The delegates listened in silence. Many of them had spent the past 6 months wondering if humanity would turn on them next. "But we did not reveal ourselves to become conquerors," Adams continued. "We did not build our fleets to rule the galaxy through fear. We built them to protect our people and to create a future where no species needs to hide its strength because no species uses strength for oppression." She pressed a button, and the screens around the chamber lit up with images. Not weapons this time, but hospitals and schools and research stations. Human technology being shared with former enemies, human doctors treating alien diseases, human engineers helping rebuild worlds damaged by centuries of war. We choose partnership over dominion. We choose to share our knowledge with species who share our values of peace and cooperation. We choose to protect the weak rather than exploit them. We choose to build a galaxy where strength serves justice instead of cruelty. Admiral Daniel Mercer III watched the speech from his flagship orbiting New Geneva. The world below was still a tomb, still covered in glass craters and radioactive dust, but construction ships were already arriving. Human engineers were already planning how to restore the planet. One day, cities would rise again, where 4 million people had died. Captain Lauren Mitchell, newly promoted to Rear Admiral, stood beside him on the observation deck. She had led the occupation forces that captured Vectis's surviving commanders. She had testified at their trials. She had watched justice finally come for the creatures who had murdered her family. "Do you think they believed her?" Mitchell asked, watching Adams's speech on a display screen. "The other species? Do you think they actually believe we want peace?" Mercer considered the question carefully. "Some of them believe it. The ones who treated us fairly during the pretense, the ones who secretly helped us prepare for this day. They know what kind of people we are." "No, and the others? The others are afraid. They are waiting to see what we do next. They think we might turn on them at any moment. The way the Kethrani turned on us." Mitchell nodded slowly. "Then we have to show them. We have to prove that humanity is different." "Yes," Mercer agreed, "and that might be harder than winning the war." A year after the Battle of New Geneva, a monument was erected on Earth. It stood in the center of Geneva, a tower of white stone reaching toward the sky. At its base, 4 million names were carved into the rock, each one representing a soul lost in the massacre that had ended humanity's long pretense. The dedication ceremony brought together leaders from dozens of species. Some came to honor the dead. Others came because refusing the invitation would have been politically dangerous. But all of them stood in silence as President Adams read the inscription carved beneath the names. They died so we would finally stand. We stand so others never fall. Admiral Mercer attended the ceremony with Admiral Mitchell at his side. They stood among the crowd, wearing dress uniforms for the first time in years. Around them, human soldiers and alien dignitaries mingled in ways that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. My grandfather started all this, Mercer said quietly. 300 years ago, he convinced humanity to hide. He created the plan that made everything possible. Of Remender. Mitchell looked at him. Do you think he would be proud of how it ended? Mercer looked up at the monument, at the names of 4 million people who had paid the ultimate price for humanity's great deception. He thought about his grandfather, a man he had never met, who had set in motion events that would reshape the galaxy. I think he would be glad the hiding is over, Mercer said finally. I think he would be glad we finally got to show them who we really are. Above them, human ships patrolled peaceful skies, guardians of a galaxy that finally understood the truth about Earth. Humanity had never been weak. They had simply been waiting for the right moment to rise. And now that they had risen, they would never pretend again.